Hello again, and welcome back to another sewing video. Today we are just doing a simple winter project. Now, I am a person who will always pick a skirt over pants, and that becomes slightly difficult in Chicago or New York winters, depending on if I'm at home or at school. So to rectify this problem, I've decided that I need to make some things out of heavier fabrics because I have an issue where I usually go for cotton fabrics, which are lighter because I prefer the natural fibers, and I am in college. And that gives you enough information about my financial situation to know that wools are a little out of my budget sometimes. Now, I ordered this corduroy off of Etsy, and I chose it because I really liked this color and I thought that it would be a good wintry color while it also can work for other seasons. I really enjoyed the texture of corduroy, which is why I decided to go for a corduroy project. And this one specifically is still very lightweight, so I can gather it down really nicely and make a really nice big skirt. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe. And tell me what you like to wear in the winter, because I sometimes have a hard time coming up with outfit choices that will keep me warm, yet also not look bulky from layers. So let me know. Alright, let's get started. To start off, we're going to use this McCall's pattern as a base for the bodice, and we have to make some alterations. Since this has a button placket, I'm going to line up where that button placket would be with the center front fold of my fabric, because I don't want buttons down the front, I want to do a zipper up the back, so I have to remove all that extra fabric there. I'm also going to alter this into a V-neck, so I am just drawing a line to make it a V. And then everything gets cut out. For the back, we have to make up for that lost area, so I am adding back some more seam allowance to make sure I have enough space to put in my zipper. And we are doing the same on the facing. Then we have to make our own facing for the new neckline we've created. So I just traced out the neckline and then added my width. Okay, because this fabric has these stripes going along parallel to the selvage, I'm going to need to cut panels because I want my stripes going up and down, not across my body for the skirt, which is going to be much more of a pain in the ass than what I usually do, which is just gather along the edge of the selvage. So I have to do the math, which I am extraordinarily not happy about. So I determined that I wanted my panels to be 30 inches long to make them nice and cozy, so I just marked that and then traced a straight line across it. For the sleeve, I'm using the Simplicity multi-pack pattern, and I'm using pattern A and cutting that out. And then after that's cut out, we can start prepping the bodice pieces. First I am marking my darts, which I have pre-marked with dots through the pattern paper, and I'm just connecting those dots to make sure that I get them pinned correctly. And then those get sewn. I am starting from the bottom of each of these and sewing past the top, not backstitching on the top, so that I can finish them off more smoothly. And to do that finishing method, I am just simply knotting the two ends of the thread that ran off of the fabric. Once that's all done, we have to make sure to iron it, and we have to make sure we're ironing it towards the sides and not towards the center to try to get as much of that bulk out of it as possible. And I'm using my tailor's ham to make sure that I get into all those little cracks and crevices. And then we can pin the bodice together. I am pinning it together with French seams, so don't worry that I'm doing right sides out. And then we do our first line of stitching. And then we can trim off that excess seam allowance. I don't often do this. I usually skip this step when I'm working with something like cotton, just because that's not a super bulky fabric, but with how thick this fabric is with the little fluffs, I trim it so that when we do this part of the seam, it stays as flat as possible. And then those steps are repeated with the facing to make sure that it is perfectly matching the neckline of the bodice. And then once those are all done, we can pin that facing on to the bodice. and then I am just using a simple stitch to connect them. This does not need to be a French seam. And then I am trimming this to reduce the amount of bulk that is in that seam. Turning it over so that the raw edges are hidden underneath. And then whip stitching it down. And here's how it looks all finished. Next step is seaming the sleeves together, which are also done with a French seam. And then here are the cuffs, which I did not film because they were pretty boring. So I am just clipping the seam allowance so that it turns inwards nicely, and turning them inside out and ironing them flat. And then we can gather down that cuff. This turned out to be a ton more fabric than I thought it was going to be, which made it difficult to sew, as you will see. So I kind of regret using the sleeve pattern only because it was slightly too big for how bulky this fabric is. And then after that was gathered down, it got pinned together. And here's me fighting the sewing machine every step of the way. And then to finish it off, I am just turning the seam allowance under and whip stitching it down right along the other stitch line. And there's the cuff, all nice and finished. Ignore these fluffies. And then we can do the same thing to the arm side. For the arm side, I am positioning all of my gathering at the top of the sleeve. I thought that's where the bulk would fit nicely and make it look a little better. So that is where it's all going. This one is not stitched on with a French seam, as you will notice, but I will explain why in a moment. Finish this off, I am binding it with some bias tape. And this is because I thought with all of the gathering, a French seam would make a super bulky area right in my armpit, which I thought would not be comfortable. And then that was just whip stitched down once again. And now we can start with the skirt panels. I decided not to do pockets for these just because it was already going to be super bulky and I didn't want to add more fabric. So we are just doing a simple gathered rectangle skirt. And these are also done with French seams. And then the next step before we get that gathered down is to prep the hem. So I am folding it up once, ironing it all the way across the whole length of the skirt, pinning it in place because this fabric was not liking to keep its shape, and then flipping it up again and ironing it again. And then we can stitch that down. Once that is all finished, we can gather down the waist. And then it gets pinned to the bodice fabric. As you can see, these gathers are super dense. I didn't take into account the density of the fabric compared to like a cotton when I was deciding how large I wanted my panels to be. Learn from that. That was a mistake. And then this seam is finished the same way that the sleeves are, once again to just reduce bulk. And then finally, we can start finishing up that back seam, which is once again done with a French seam. And then the rest of it is going to be made into the zipper. And finally, for the cuffs, I am sewing on some snaps to keep them closed. And then a button right on top of those to make it look a little nicer. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really enjoy how this turned out. It's very nice and warm and will be a good layering piece. I hope you have a great rest of your year, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye!